Welcome to the Coroner's Report, Episode 5, Part 4, Darla Harper and Pam Page, When the Cousins Went Missing. Before we begin, please remember this is a true crime podcast with adult themes. Please be aware, when possible, the actual person's voice is in this podcast. However, several witnesses are deceased and some chose not to participate. Please remember to like and follow us on all social media platforms and share with your true crime friends. All suspects or persons of interest mentioned are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law.
Welcome back to the Coroner's Report. My name is Steve Navoychek, and I'm a former director of the Arkansas State Crime Lab and served as the coroner for two of the biggest counties in the state. Yes, I've seen a lot over the years, but these days I'm retired, spending my days chasing my dog Butter and reviewing interesting cases. In 1986, Darla Harper vanished without a trace in Arkansas, a case that left investigators baffled and communities on edge. I was part of the search for Darla's remains, and she's been on my mind ever since. Just 3 years after Darla went missing, tragedy struck again as her cousin, Pam Page, disappeared under eerily similar circumstances in Arizona. In our last episode, we explained how Pam was close to her parents and siblings and had just gone back to Arizona after visiting family in Arkansas. Pam was happy and looking forward to a future with her husband. She was making plans.
No one's going to make plans for the future with a husband they're planning on leaving. And what a husband Rob Page seemed to be. When we were interviewing the family, there were several times I was really shocked at what was said and at who he was. His own sister, Bettina Page Frisbee, told us how he was displeased with Pam because she simply gained weight.
His alibi the day she went missing just never sat well with me or any of the other investigators. Other than opening the video store that morning, there were no other verifiable sightings, even though he went to several auto parts stores in a truck that was fairly memorable.
That pretty little custom-painted truck sat there at a parts store on a very busy street, and no one saw it for hours. No one remembered at any of the parts stores anyone coming in for that one particular part.
The worst part for me is that damn letter. No one writes a goodbye letter like that. Line after line, it just seems like I was swimming through a river of bullshit with none of them little wings on my arms or with goggles on.
You trying to bring sexy back with water wings. Gotcha. It was something. I'm not sure what it was, but it was something. Steve, is that how you felt when you were working on the Darla Harper case, like the husband's alibi was just laughably weak?
When you're counting alibis and not apples, 1 + 1 = none. It's just so frustrating to investigators to be that close and not be able to pull the case over the finish line and provide closure for these families. The Darla Harper case was the main case that got me wanting to bring it to the forefront again.
Well, you were invested after crawling around underneath the house in Sherwood looking for a body. I have nightmares about stuff like that, but we absolutely wanted to bring awareness and some fresh perspectives to these cases as they've been cold for so many years.
This is that one case that has stuck with me and many others over the years. I believe that there still may be someone with additional information that they can share to bring one or both of these cases to an end.
Oh, it's definitely a possibility. I believe we all felt like these crimes were not done by just one person. In both situations, the perpetrators had to have help. And with these cases being so similar and so intertwined, they really both needed to be revisited together to get a full picture of what we're trying to accomplish with cases like this.
With Darla, every year on the anniversary, the investigators thought of the case. Some of the players may have changed, but on the 10-year anniversary in 1996, Arkansas police were no closer to solving the case than they were in 1986. But this was one of those cases that law enforcement officials never really stopped investigating. Randy Johnson was the new sheriff in Pulaski County, and he still had hope. He met with Darla's parents and announced the department was going to look at old leads again, and they were going to examine the file from front to back. The Darla Harper case just didn't go away. It didn't get resolved, but it certainly never went away. Detective Kimball recalls that every new administration looked at the case.
They keep digging it up every time a new sheriff came in. You know, it'd be a big to-do, and we're reopening, and we're looking back at everything that happened and see what we missed. So there's probably stuff in there that I don't even have a clue about. Vince either. We don't know what's happened with that case since way back when.
I remember how hard lead investigator Carl Beadle worked on this case. It was that case for him. The case, the one that will never leave him. This is the one that keeps investigators awake for years. He did everything he could to solve the case.
I've worked this case for years, but recently returned to patrol duties, and there's so much involved in this case, and you can see 2 or 3 different scenarios that could have happened to this girl, but you'd be hard-pressed to prove any of them.
Investigator Carol Kimball also remembers how Carl Beadle worked the case.
He became obsessed, lived, ate, and breathed this case. It haunts him to this day. I mean, it really haunts him.
Investigator Vince Mayer also remembers the frustration.
That goes back to what frustrated Carl Beadle so much was once we investigated those few leads, then everything just dried up. And then it was basically up to him day in and day out to go, all right, what do I need to do now? What do I need to do now to keep this case going in the right direction? And then you have the number one suspect who everybody thought was involved, but you can't get enough of the probable cause, to do anything because, once again, you had to have a body.
Mel Nixon never stopped trying to find her daughter.
It was 24/7 for those people. They spent so much time at the sheriff's office. We were all on a first-name basis.
Remember, Barry married Yvonne after Darla went missing, and Yvonne had 2 little girls. Barry's stepdaughter, Christy Cox, remembers what her mother, Yvonne, told her about Darla.
She didn't tell me a whole lot because I don't think she knew a whole lot. She just knew the after effects of what Darla's family were doing. They had a lot of money. I just know that the in-laws made his life hell after she passed because they were just convinced he had something to do with it.
Of course, if my daughter was missing and I thought her ex-husband had something to do with it, I might cause a lot of hell too.
Like nearly all parents, Mel Nixon never gave up hope that finally something might be discovered. Then out of the blue, in 2009, a man walking his dog in a wooded area in Sherwood, Arkansas, stumbled upon what he thought was a shallow grave. I was really hopeful, as were the investigators, that this would be it, that they would find her.
Well, that's my worst nightmare, stumbling across a body in the woods.
Well, that used to be my job, looking for bodies in the woods. Now I just wander around in the forest with my dog Butter and hope I don't stumble across a human body. We've discovered other things, but never a human. The only open missing person case in the area was Darla's, and the investigators were hoping this would solve the case. But after investigating, there was nothing there. No Darla, and the case went quiet once again.
It's interesting that in Arizona, everyone we spoke to on both sides of the family believed that Rob killed Pam, while in Arkansas, there were some doubts from family members. Barry's stepdaughter, Christy Cox, is conflicted by her memories of her stepfather.
I don't know what their marriage was like. I just know broken up pieces of the story from what my mom told me. Barry was of good character. He just didn't seem the type that would, number one, and I'm not saying he was by any means ignorant. I don't think he was smart enough to do that and then cover it up and keep it hidden all this time. Number two, I saw the character of how he treated my mom. He did do some horrible things while he was on his drug binges. He'd steal from her, caused a lot of stress in her life. She had a lifelong battle of mental illness, and the stress of his being away and her worrying about him would trigger her episode. But he was never cruel to her. He never mistreated her. He never cursed at her. I don't think he had it in him to cover up or even cause her death or intentionally hurt her.
Christy has her own theory of what might have happened to Darla.
In my own head, and I have no proof of this, I think they were both on drugs. They were both doing drugs, and something happened. I don't know whether she OD'd or, people do crazy things when they're strung out on drugs, and the families could just not let it go. Of course this was horrible, but sometimes you just got to let things be, and I understand they want closure, but if there's no proof, there's no proof.
And then, nothing. The sheriffs, they came and went. There wasn't anything in the newspapers for many, many years. Then in 2013, news from Lufkin, Texas, brought Barry's name back up in the paper.
Investigators say a truck driver has been killed in a 3-vehicle wreck in Lufkin that involved a school bus. 57-year-old Darla Harper of Pine Bluff, Arkansas, was pronounced dead at the scene of the wreck involving his tanker truck, another 18-wheeler, and a school bus.
The Nixons long ago accepted that Darla had been murdered, but they never learned where their daughter's remains were located. If Barry had been guilty, his death ended any hope of finding Darla. Most of us involved in the Arkansas case really did believe there was only one suspect, Barry. Detective Captain Kimball recalls how Barry Harper just didn't seem to give a damn.
He fought us the whole way on everything that we were trying to do to find the mother of his child.
So much has changed in the science of investigation these days, but back then, everyone's hands were tied.
We were doing the best we can with what we had, is what we did.
Looking back now, Captain Carol Kimball has a theory on what could have happened.
It could have been a domestic gone awry, because of money or custody or, whatever.
Another question that eats at me is, who else was there? Who else knows where Darla's body is? Because I just don't believe Barry acted alone, and neither do the detectives.
I think it would be really hard if you were by yourself at that apartment complex with those apartments just right on top of each other, late at night when everything's real quiet, to be able to control someone other than you just completely, knock them unconscious. Then you got to carry them. It might be kind of hard to carry them and put them into that little car unless you've got someone else with you helping you.
Still, Barry's stepdaughter, Christy Cox, cannot see the man who raised her being a killer.
When you do something that evil, it wears on your soul. It comes out. That wickedness eventually comes out. True colors start to eventually show. Barry was never like that. He kept away so much. He was always on the road. And I'm sure he stayed on the road because that was a way to stay away from rumors. He was good to my mom.
The detectives that work this case still hope there will be a resolution. Not so much for them, but for Mel Nixon.
That would be the greatest thing in the world, is just to give her some peace in knowing that she at least has a bone of her daughters.
We've got unsolved and cold cases down here. And, I tell you, the 7 years that I was up there, I can't recall, other than with Darla, I think most of our homicides were, we identified the suspects. And this isn't a whodunit either. We know who did this.
Like on these cases, same thing. You have a witness statement. Those can be dismantled by a good defense attorney. Even confessions get turned around. But that physical evidence, that piece of evidence that links the suspect to the crime, that's what prosecutors want. And that's how cases are successfully solved.
Back in Arizona, Darla's aunt and uncle were waiting for news on her cousin Pam. Any revelation, just anything. Her husband, Rob, was always the lead suspect, just like Barry was always the lead suspect in Darla Harper's case.
There were rumors, but no evidence. Pam's sister, Jimmy, knew he wasn't being truthful.
He lied at every turn. He parked her car, pretended he found it. Just everything you can think of. Dumped her clothes, all of that. We knew.
Tracy, one thing I've noticed in nearly every one of these cases, right in the middle of it, is a liar. Someone who lies so much and lies so long that they believe their own lies. It's just unbelievable to me. Most of these people, they lie so much that I bet they even have to have somebody else call their own damn dog for them.
Well, let's remember, Rob wasn't all that good with pets. Rob's sister, Bettina, thinks a clue might be in Pam's recent weight gain.
When Rob told me that he would not be married to somebody that looked like Pam, that was as heavy as she was, he did not want to have a child, and she did want to. And I could imagine Pam taking herself off of whatever kind of birth control and getting pregnant and thinking that maybe he would decide it was okay because she was pregnant. That was in the back of my mind. I've never really said that out loud until now, but I've really not had anybody to talk to about it because my husband, oh my gosh, what it did to our marriage was just unbelievable.
So where the hell could her body be? Arizona, like Arkansas, has a lot of hidey holes. Pam's sister Jimmy had some ideas.
If you know the Phoenix area, there's millions of places to put somebody.
Rob's sister also had an idea.
I'll tell you, when we used to go out there and visit them, Pam and I would go shopping and, whatever we would do. And Rob would take my husband out gold digging. They would go out to all these old caves. And I could imagine her being in the bottom of one of those caves. You would never find her, ever.
Man, a little GPS these days goes a long, long way, doesn't it?
Technology is truly grand. But of course, GPS wasn't available to investigators back then. It was a lot easier then to get away with murder. The investigators were following up on every lead, but just like Darla's case, time moved on, and so did the investigators. New investigators were brought in with fresh eyes, yet there was still no resolution.
And this case needed just that. physical evidence.
I often tell people that are from my era that are dinosaurs, if we had had half of the availabilities back then that are around now, the amazing things that can be done in the labs and by physicians and PhDs and scientists is absolutely mind-boggling. And I think that's the future of crime solving. But sadly, so many of these cases that are old, that have gone cold, there's no evidence left, like in our case of Darla Harper, where we know we had a piece of bone, but nobody knows where that is now. And back then the bone was tested, but there was no way to figure out much about it. If we had that now, it's unbelievable what could be found.
The big question was, where was Pam's body? Pam's sister Jimmy had a few ideas.
He took his boat out that weekend that Pam was last seen. He took it to, I'm wanting to think, Lake Havasu. She was last seen on Friday evening, and he took his boat out on Saturday. But he has been known to go to Lake Powell, too. I mean, he could have took her there. They were building a culvert. You know, they have a lot of those going through Phoenix. There was about 3 or 4 blocks from where Pam's shop was. They were in the middle of building one, and they poured concrete in it that next day. That was what the police kind of thought. But then there's a possibility he went to the desert, too.
Don Devereaux investigated this case for unsolved mysteries back in the 90s, and he's adamant that Rob killed Pam.
I mean, Rob was a sociopath. I think he just wanted to walk away from that without any financial losses and did so. I'll go to my grave pretty convinced that Rob got away with killing his wife and that the body is still probably buried in West Phoenix.
Rob stayed in the same house where his wife disappeared so many years ago. He made a few odd improvements to this house over time.
Rob had a tennis court put in his backyard. I don't know when, but it was after Pam passed away. They had a huge backyard. I even thought, well, maybe she's buried under that. Rob didn't play tennis.
Now, he did remarry at least once, so maybe there was a reason for a man who didn't play tennis to have a tennis court built. But there were family members who believed he was innocent.
My brother and sister ended up having a very good relationship, and she believed to the day that she passed away that he did not do anything to Pam.
Rob remained in that house, but his health began failing. In 2013, Rob Page was on the losing end of a cancer battle, and his family gathered. His sister Bettina was hopeful that there might be some resolution for the family.
When Rob was sick, when he had his cancer, my sister and I went out there. I went out there with every intention. I wasn't going to leave until my brother told me what happened. That was why I went out there. There was never the opportunity or any of that for me to even try to halfway start a conversation about it. I was going to fly back out there in early January, just me, so I could talk to Rob and find out and see what, I figured he would tell me what happened, but he went downhill real fast, and he passed away on Christmas Eve.
Robert Page fought liver and colon cancer, but died. Pam's sister Jimmy says that even on his deathbed, he did not confess.
His nephew was a preacher, and his sisters were there, and he had colon cancer, and it was like about 6 months, I think, before he died. The nephew asked him, did he want to tell him what happened to Pam, and would he give him information so they could find her? And he made him get out of the room, and that was all of it.
The family still has hope that maybe someone helped him or maybe he said something to someone. We have tried to contact his ex-wife and an ex-girlfriend, but neither chose to participate or even return our calls. Over the years, Pam's family also tried to reach out.
He married somebody else that did have a small child. She had one that was like 5 or so. The first time she answered the phone, but when she figured out who I was, she hung up. And she would never answer again. And then we found out where she lived. Me and my mom and my sister went and parked and waited for her to come home. And she wouldn't answer the door.
In 2017, the Maricopa County attorney sent the family a letter stating that if Robert Page were still alive, he would be charged with second-degree murder.
If this matter was submitted to me today for consideration of charges, I believe we'd have a reasonable likelihood of conviction of Robert Page on the charge of murder in the second degree. We really have no solid information to prove premeditation for a count of murder in the first degree. In view of the fact that suspect Rob Page is now deceased, I consider this case closed.
Pam's parents never gave up hope that they would find their daughter, but both are now deceased. Pam's sister Jimmy remembers the toll her disappearance took on her parents.
It's your focus from the time you get up until you go to bed. It took my dad had just retired. He sat in a chair and wasted away. I mean, he just could not get past it. It breaks your heart.
Rob's sister Bettina says Pam is never far from her mind.
My daughter Miranda reminds me so much of Pam. Pam was just in love with Miranda. It's like you walk in the room and the sun just comes in with you.
We often just think of the loss of a family member, not thinking of the collateral damage. But out of bad, sometimes something good happens. Pam's sister Jimmy remembers.
It made you more aware of how precious time is and how things can disappear without you even thinking about it. You just take people for granted, and you shouldn't. We didn't take each other for granted.
The detectives retired or moved on, but they never forgot. How could they?
The question that Carl Beadle got asked wherever he went, whether it's the sheriff's office or wherever, that he dealt with every single day. Where's Darla?
If we had half of the technology back then that we have today, oh my God, this case and a lot of others would have already been solved a long time ago.
Leslie grew up and had a family of her own, never really knowing what happened to her mother and not remembering what she may or may not have witnessed as a baby. But Barry was always part of Leslie's life, according to his stepdaughter, Christy Cox.
He saw her a lot when she was grown and she got married. He was all a part of that. He got to see his grandchild. So, yeah, he was a huge part of her life.
We all grew older. Some of us grew wiser. And this case, it's one that still sticks with you and makes you wonder.
I can see how you could lay awake a lot of nights going over every lead over and over again.
And that's another thing, I think people always say there's no perfect crime. Well, how many unsolved homicides are there? Those are all perfect crimes, if you ask me. And we all know this now because of everybody watches true crime on television. But, many times the cops know exactly who did it. Everybody knows who did it, but you got to have that evidence. You got to have physical evidence. And we know that the physical evidence is just something that prosecutors demand these days. Confessions don't count much anymore, and witness statements can be beat up and refuted. And that physical evidence, that little piece of evidence that ties one thing to the crime, one person to the death, whatever, that's what prosecutors want. And it's the job of the police to find that.
When I tell this story, what sticks out is Leslie, the little girl who was raised by her mourning grandparents.
Pam had no children. She wanted them, but she didn't have any. Rob didn't want kids at all. But Darla had Leslie, and she'll never know her mother. That, to me, is just the saddest thing.
The case in Arkansas is still an open case, according to the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office.
It's still basically an open case, I guess, because it's an unsolved mystery. I'm no longer in law enforcement. I don't know that I would have access to it.
Mel Nixon never gave up looking. She never stopped pressuring the police to do more.
And that's what a mom does. I asked Jimmy, Pam's sister and Darla's cousin, what advice she would give to family members if their loved ones went missing.
You don't give up. You be persistent. What we did wrong, and we knew it, after we got back and realized that we should have been there. They told us that first time we went, go home, because my mom's birthday was coming up, and they wanted Mom to be here to answer the phone in case Pam called her if she had left or something. And we did it. We came back, and we shouldn't have. We should have stayed there and put out posters and sat at the police door until they did something. And that's why we went back. We would go back during those first probably 5 or 6 years anyway. We would go to 3 or 4 times a year. You keep it out there as much as you possibly can.
That's got to be a hard row to hoe, just not knowing.
Our first trip out there, we knew Pam was not coming home. Well, you try to pretend that maybe sometime they will. I go on that deck, I can just see Pam standing out there that last time. The last picture I have of her was her standing on that deck. But you just don't think about it happening.
You know, crimes get solved generally in one of three ways. You have witness statements, eyewitness statements, statements that you think are great. You have a confession from the person who you think is the suspect or the perpetrator. Or you have physical evidence. Physical evidence that links the perpetrator to the victim or to the scene. Those are the things that prosecutors want.
I agree. This is the primary reason that we created the Coroner's Report podcast. It's so these cases do not stay cold. It's our hope that the right person or persons might have a little smidge of information that can shed new light onto these cases. The best outcome in cases like this is that with new information, the families might somehow have some sort of closure.
If you or anyone you know has any information that you think could be valuable, please reach out to the Pulaski County Sheriff's Office at 501-340-6601 or the Peoria, Arizona Police Department at 623-773-8311.
This concludes Part 4 of Episode 5 of the Coroner's Report, Darla Harper and Pam Page, When the Cousins Went Missing. Remember, if you'd like our content, please remember to like and subscribe. If you have questions, please reach out to us on our website at coronersreport.net or on any social media platform at The Coroner's Report. Special thanks to investigators Vince Mayer and Carol Kimball, former investigative journalist for Unsolved Mysteries Dawn Devereaux, and family members Christy Cox, Jimmy Frisbee Rice, and Bettina Page Frisbee for their insight and their memories. Thanks also to Heather Gruppen with Lost and Found blog and Lost and Found podcast. Special thanks to voice actors J.D. West and Alan Prather. Copyright 2024, Aussie Grove Media Group, LLC.